Welcome to another edition of Beyond Data Management Podcast, where environmental health professionals from around the nation come to talk. Powered by HS GovTech. I'm your host, Cameron Garrison. Thank you so much for joining us again today. Really looking forward to the conversation that we have for you on deck here today. One of the, and I've been in environmental health for 25 years and met a lot of directors. He is unique among many in that agency. Van Creasap from Marion County, Ohio. Super interesting guy, not someone who as you're going to learn, he did not come out of college and go into environmental health and then kind of work his way through it. In fact, up until just less than a decade ago, he was in the private sector. So Van from Marion County, Ohio, really been looking forward to this. Welcome to the Beyond Data Management Podcast. Thanks for making the time and looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
So I sort of teased it a little bit there in the introduction. You do really have. In fact, I think the country overall would be served well if more people with your profile and experience and history got into public service and leadership. So maybe to back up a bit for maybe those that don't know your story, and tell us about your journey and how you ended up finding yourself in environmental health and then ultimately in the big chair director there at Marion County, Ohio.
So, right out of high school, go to college and then try to start figuring out what you want to do. I just happened to live in a community where my grandparents lived, and they also happened to have a business in our community. They had a small vineyard winery that they started planting back in the early 1970s. And when my grandfather, who was a physician in our community, retired as a physician in 1984, he opened the winery full time then, as pretty much his hobby business for his retirement years. And myself, my siblings, we were the local family, so we would spend a lot of time out here helping. And through college, I started working out here. And by about the end of my sophomore year at the Ohio State University, I was pretty much found myself running the business as my grandparents' health had started to decline a little bit. So when I was at Ohio State, I was working on a degree, a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration with a economics specialization. At one time, I thought, oh, maybe I'll go into the market or do this or do that. Didn't really know what I wanted to get into. And the more time I spent out here with my grandparents, the more time I really enjoyed, one, being out in the country, being outside, doing the things in the vineyard that you get to do, making wine. It was pretty cool to be 19, 20 years old, making and selling wine before you could legally purchase it yourself was kind of a neat opportunity. And pretty much and still do the winery as well, still to this day. What
kind of wines do you? Sorry to interject, but
no, you're fine.
Everybody's kind of probably thinking that question at the same time. What all do you all produce there at your family winery?
So being in Ohio in a cold climate region, we grow a lot of American varieties. So that's going to be your Concords, your Niagaras, and your American hybrids, which are going to be your Edelweiss, Itasca, and Cayuga Whites, and some of those types of varieties. And then we have French American hybrids, which one parent is American, the other parent is one of the European varieties. So that'd be like our Seyval, our Chancellor, our Maréchal Foch, Vidal Blanc, some of those varieties. So we kind of grow a smattering of grapes out here. We make anything from dry white to sweet whites, dry red to sweet red. So we try to cover the whole gamut for folks. And
you have a huge product selection then, because wineries, I'm North Carolina, it's basically muscadine, and if you don't like that, if you don't want to go to Biltmore, you're not going to really, and they don't even grow all their grapes. So you actually have a very broad selection.
Yeah, we probably have about 15 varieties of grapes, and actually just before North Carolina, I don't know if you get up into Virginia much into wine country, but a variety of grape that they grow there is called Norton. We actually have some Norton here in the vineyard as well. It's also popular down in Missouri, Arkansas, but you get down to where you're at and you get into more of those humid climates, and it's really becomes muscadine city because of the disease pressures that are so hard on the other varieties.
Wow, it's not my favorite wine. No knock on it, but
No, it's a unique flavor, that's for
it
sure.
it really is. So do you happen to sell online, or is it local there?
Now we do have an online sales presence, and I do not a lot, but enough to make it worthwhile having the online portal.
That's
And
awesome. And we'll put it in the
yeah, so we
description as well, but if you want to throw it out, what's your website? Cuz
it's shamrockvineyard.com. I appreciate the plug. So yeah, it's something that we've been doing for a long time. We take a lot of pride in it, and it's pretty unique. I get to do something every day to keep my grandparents' legacy alive. So that's really pretty special, and I really feel honored to be able to do that.
that is. And so since basically sophomore in college, and you said it
Mhm.
right, the Ohio State,
That's right.
you were basically taking over running of that winery. So at that point, did you think, well, this is my career trajectory, and this is a passion, and this is where I'm headed? Did you see yourself when you were at the Ohio State? Did you see yourself where you are now? And then I'll let you pick up before I rudely interrupted with
No, you're
picking
fine.
up from mid college on with your journey.
I saw myself just doing the winery pretty much forever. Full time, only thing that I would do. Pretty much from the time I graduated, then I took over out here, and then my grandfather passed in 2006. Grandma passed in '09, and each after each one of them passed, I tried to talk with my mom and her surviving siblings. There's four of them. And to try to buy the family out of the business, it didn't really get anywhere until about 2011. So I was already kind of behind the eight ball on my 5-year plan after my grandfather passed, for me to be able to take the business over and make the changes and do the things that I wanted to do out here. And so, you learn a lot when you're working with family in a family business, and you understand as you get older why they write books about family business and how challenging it can be. So or myself, my wife, we bought the family out in 2011, and pretty much I ran the vineyard winery, and she worked full time, so we could have insurance and those things that are nice to have. And about I don't know, maybe about 10, 12, a little bit longer than that now, probably about 12 years ago, we had a couple really rough winters with those polar vortexes that kind of came out of the north, and we lost a lot of vineyard over the couple year period. And at that time, I was like, well, this is tough. How am I going to replace all these vines? How am I going to just manage the stress of running this vineyard winery with limited income structure, all those kinds of things, and replanting the vineyard, which it's expensive, it's time consuming. From the time you plant to the time you harvest, it's 3 to 5 years. So it's quite a monetary and labor intensive thing to do to replant and reestablish. So at that time, I was like, I'm really not using my degree. I should probably start looking for something in the area that might work out for me. And I was part of a young professionals group, met a few people through that, and was offered hey, why don't you come apply for an internship to collect mosquitoes at the health department? And I'm like, well, what would I be
What was
doing?
your first question? How do you collect a mosquito?
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, well, how do you do that? Because my grandfather at the winery would always joke about, how do they get the urine from the coyote to spray around the vineyard to keep other critters out. It's kind of the same thing. How do you collect a mosquito? So I was like, okay. So I did a little research on it, and went ahead and applied, and went in and interviewed, and accepted the position. And it worked out great because I was doing that in the morning, 4 hours a day, 20 hours a week. And then in the afternoons, I'd come back to the winery. And so I really, my real introduction into public health was just sitting in really the bullpen, if you will, where the EH team was sitting at the time, and just listening to their stories as I was sorting frozen mosquitoes into test tubes to send off to the state lab for identification and testing purposes. And just listening to the stories, I'm like, wow, this is kind of an interesting industry. And I know a lot of the players and people in our community because I've been around it my whole life. And this is kind of neat. So did that, and then found myself doing grass and weed complaints then the following year. And it just kind of snowballed, really. I just kind of really found myself enthralled that 20 to 25 people and one little government agency could do all of the things that we do, let alone the five of us or six of us in the environmental health division, just looking at the whole agency. When you think of a population of about 65, 66,000 people, and there's only 20 to 25 of us, 3 to 4,000 people that each person in that building represents. And we're trying to do a lot of things to impact the health of our community. That's kind of monumental when you think about how underfunded we are in public health and all of the things that we go
Wow.
through. And so I just really took to it. And, as I got more involved and I started looking at my math and science credits from the Ohio State University so I could see what I might be eligible to do to become a sanitarian in training. And lo and behold, I had enough math and science credits to do it. And so that kind of put me on the trajectory to where I am today, where it was, just helping out doing some random food inspections, backing up, doing some um, septic installs, helping our one septic person, and just kind of doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And it turned into here I am, now going on about year three of being the director in Marion of the environmental health division, and just absolutely love everything that I get to do. Is it very busy running two operations between the health department and the winery? Yes, but I absolutely love it. It's a lot of fun, and it's really neat to be able to see the things that we get to do, and really help your teammates grow in their role too. I'm not where I'm at without them. And so it's pretty cool, and it's pretty special to see the people around you start to grow when you get things right with some of the cultural things that you're able to do.
Culture, it's such an interesting word, and it really hits on it. And you, it's observable, and not just by me, even folks at HS that have worked with your team. You can tell sometimes when you have a really healthy, happy culture, or when people are just, holding their breath and getting through it. And maybe it's not the most pleasant thing ever. And you have definitely achieved that with your group. Do you attribute? So I think there's multiple reasons. Obviously, just your person vision, kind of how you see the world is a huge part of it. But do you think that two parts here? Do you think that some of it is because you came in and started at the department as an intern, really as a side hustle? And if I'm not mistaken, you did everything from maintenance, painting the department. Like
Correct.
you've worked almost in kind of every rotation, chief cook and bottle washer, basically, right? Like you did not
Correct.
just go right to director. How much did that help you think you form your philosophy on leading that group overall? And then part two of that would be how you view your still to this day a business operator and owner. How much do you think coming to government after you were established as a businessman also maybe helped with the secret sauce of what you're doing there in Marion County?
Yeah, so it's funny you say that. I was doing maintenance over the one winter between my internship as a mosquito guide to doing grass and weeds and mosquitoes the following year. And then you throw in the bag of tricks that COVID threw at us. At one time we had lost our epidemiologist, our director of nursing, and for about 2.5, 3 months, I moved my desk downstairs to those offices, and I was in charge of the contact tracers for about 2.5, 3 months as COVID was really kind of getting its feet, sunk into our community. And so I got to see kind of how the nursing team operated, and then going on to clinics and just seeing how the rest of the agency kind of operates. Health departments are interesting, especially when you start looking at them at the organizational level. Nursing and environmental health, they're your staples. And then some health districts will house WIC, some won't. It just kind of depends on where they're at. And WIC operates in a very different set of parameters because of the way that their grant structures or funding structures are, that they were kind of limited in what they would do with COVID and that kind of stuff. So it was a lot of nursing and a lot of pitching into clinics and doing a lot of those things. So I kind of got to see a lot of what the whole building does, and then was able to kind of take in what I've learned over my years at running my own business and seeing, okay, there's some things here that apply, that we could, maybe try to be a little bit more efficient, or we could do this, we could do that. But it's hard and it's slow changes because sometimes there's a lot of fear, with some of the folks that have been in government for so long. I don't want to say change is hard for some, but it's maybe the fear of, well, what if I fail doing something different when I know what I'm doing right now is tried and true? And so I think there's a lot of fear to fail, and you can't have that, and I've learned a long time ago, I'm going to have failures in my life, and it's how you overcome them when things are rough is really what makes all of us. I equate it to a marriage. When things are great, they're going to be great. It doesn't matter who you're with. It's when things are hard, when life is hard, when things have got you down, it's that person beside you that is lifting you up, that is raising you up, that is getting you to that next point. That's when that strength of that marriage really shines, and that's when you realize, man, I've got the person, I've got what I need to propel
That is
forward.
so true.
And it's kind of the same way when working with a team of people. And when things are good, it doesn't matter who you're with.
That's
It's when
right.
things are bad that's really hard.
And it's important for culture, right? Because good times, like, you can't build that level of trust and this is my ride or die team or partner in a marriage. That if you haven't built that intentionally during the good times, for example, when something like the pandemic hits, which was outsized brutal to public health
Mhm.
and environmental health, if you haven't built that bond of trust and that's your partner and your team, if you haven't built that by the time you get to the crisis, then you're in big trouble, aren't you?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's hard to overcome that then, because then you've lost people, and not being in the director role during COVID, you could see that, you could see the stress that it was causing some of the directors that just were, maybe in a little bit over their head with trying to how to manage people during that stressful time. Not only trying to manage your own life and your own fears and your own concerns, but manage the people that are all the way around you as well. Is It was really, really pretty challenging for folks, and you could see those ripples and how they affected, really, teams around the whole agency.
And is it fair to say that we still have some like remnants or maybe scar tissue even to this day? I see it. I think in many departments, it's over, but man, did it leave such an indelible, in some cases, traumatic impression that it actually still lurks large in the back of people's minds.
Yeah, it really does, and it's kind of stunted growth, which is, it's hard to think that, how do you grow out of something out of COVID? But there's opportunity in everything, right? And I think that fear, the all that unknown, and just going through it and being belittled or being this or attacked online on your social media pages, all these things, it's hard because, as you know a lot of people in public health, man. I know some amazing people. They wear their heart on their sleeve. They are just passionate,
Yeah.
passionate people about serving their communities.
And they're not doing it for
And
fame or fortune, for sure.
exactly, they're definitely not doing it for money, because they could go elsewhere, and all those things. And so you see that, and then you see just how much hurt they were, because all they were trying to do was help.
Hmm.
And somehow that got lost on the world because of all the politicization of everything, and it just, it really burned a lot of folks out, unfortunately, that, are good people that were great in this industry. But you could just see it happening to those, around you, and even in other agencies when you would talk to them, that real chipper, happy person that used to be, you would look forward to talking on the phone,
Yeah.
became,
Gone.
hey, how are you? And
Yeah.
real monotone, and real, they became a
Yeah.
shell of who they were because of the stress.
They
And,
really did.
and
It's
shaking that
palpable.
loose is a challenge.
Absolutely, it is. What do you so coming into you were tail end of 3 years now. COVID was still it was winding down when you
Hmm.
took over, right? W-
Yeah.
What have what challenges have you found in trying to kickstart a team who had just lived 2.5 years of their life under siege. Like, in many cases, you all were just the messenger slash unfunded mandate enforcers of EOs
Right.
evolving from
Ex-
governors. What did you have to come in and do to try to reset the agenda after a really weird and tough 2.5 years?
Yeah, that was a big challenge. By the time I came in, when our previous director had left, another staff member had left, so we're now down two people, and so it was just really myself and two other sanitarians in the office that had any kind of longevity in the office. So there were three of us as sanitarians. So we had to bring in, a sanitarian to help. So we had to hire, and trying to hire that close to coming out of the pandemic was very challenging. And I know health departments are still struggling, here in Ohio, and I'm sure all across the country are struggling to hire staff. And we went months without being able to hire anybody to fill that role. So I was out in the field as the new director, trying to help encourage my team and build a team. And by doing that, that meant I had to be in the field working alongside them to show them that I'm in this fight with them. It's not just me assigning more work for them. I'm going to go out and tackle this task with you. And so I would do that, and then we would try to recruit folks and hire. And it got to a point where it was just, I could see my team was really, they were down, they were struggling, and I had to do something. And so I went to my health commissioner, and I brought up COVID. I was like, look, who's the first division you call for nursing to help? It's EH. EH are some of the most efficient, amazing people I know throughout a health department. They can
Amen.
drop what they're doing on a dime and pivot to something completely different, because they're so used to ping ponging between all these different things that we do. And so I was like, look, you got to rely on my team to help during COVID, especially when it was, in the throes of the chaos. I've identified a couple people in this building that I think have enough of a degree that they would be able to help us in the environmental health world as a sanitarian in training. Can I have them for a little bit of time? And she was like, I think that's completely reasonable. And we had just formed a new community health division, and two of those employees just happened to land in the community health division. And so we brought two of them on. One ended up lasting. The other one, this kind of work was not for them, and so it didn't really continue. So I have one community health member that we took her out and we trained her how to work in our food program, doing risk levels 1 and 2s, so the lower risk of the food levels here in the state of Ohio. And it's been amazing, So she can go out, and she's seen all of these small mom and pop grocery stores, not only in our larger cities, but our smaller villages and townships. So now she can take what she's seeing out there in those facilities when she's doing their inspections, and she can go, okay, now as a community health educator, what do I need to do to help increase the awareness for eating healthier foods? And maybe there's some things that I can partner with some of these operators to be able to encourage them to have more healthy food options, because they are rural and they're 15 minutes from another grocery store. Sometimes people are they're going to the local gas station, and that's where they're getting all of their food. So how
Wow.
can we encourage them to do some more healthier options? So it's really been kind of a neat opportunity by bringing her on board. And it all was born out of a selfish need that has really become a way to help fill an agency need to now benefit our community.
Wow.
So
You
it's really
you
been kind of cool to see that happen.
So instead of just poaching someone from the public health nursing side, you ended up making them more resilient and helping them gather more information to help them further their mission more. I don't know that there's really other departments doing that really around the country. Are you aware of any? Because it's actually pretty
There's
unique.
they're not, I talk to a lot of folks around us in the surrounding communities, and public health is still very siloed. And that's the one thing that I saw immediately coming into this world, is just how siloed things are, when really holistically, if you look at public health and the way that it's supposed to work, all pieces are supposed to work and function together. And sometimes the communication just isn't there. And I think it's because you just get so used to doing your day-to-day work that you forget that there's overlap with communicable disease, and you need to work with the epi from EH. You need to work with them for foodborne illnesses, and so on and so forth. And we forget to do that, or maybe we just ignore it because we are so just inundated with our day to day.
That is, I, I have a feeling as this makes its way around the various channels, YouTube, Spotify, and this is what words I never thought I would say in my life. Seriously, is if you are enjoying this, subscribe, hit that button, whatever platform you're on. It'll actually give you an alert every time a new episode drops. But I think you're going to end up hearing from some people asking you for more specifics about how you pull that off. Actually, some of the siloing, do you think that some of it comes from just people are too timid to raise their hand? I think it actually connects back to what you said earlier, which is fear of failure. Like, I wonder how many good ideas never go anywhere because somebody is scared of looking silly or being rejected. And you're a prime example of you just charged right in there and raised your hand and asked.
Yeah. Sometimes you just got to ask. And so, believe it or not, I can even add more to this to kind of show you what we're doing as an agency with how this has even evolved further.
Please do.
So not only are we, do we have that community health employee, educator helping us in the food program, but maybe about a year ago, the leadership team, as we've been meeting and discussing things, and how do we get our teams more team-like amongst the whole team? And it's not just the EH team, the nursing team, the community health team. How do we get everybody more integrated together and to learn more about what they do? I'm sure there's times where you have people in your organization where they might not know what somebody's doing in 2 or 3 divisions down the
Yes.
hallway.
Yeah, and it's always a challenge of how do you not put people on an island, because
Correct.
people will make better decisions if they have situational awareness.
Correct. And so what we have done is we now we've brought, basically we've kind of split our staff kind of into 2 groups for the most part. Well, 3 groups, if you will. So we have, the leadership team, and then we have our program staff, and then we have our administrative staff. And so we've gone to meeting with our program team, which are our inspectors, and they're the folks doing, probably 75% of the work at a health department. And then we're meeting with our administrative team, who are, they're basically they have the opportunity really to be the quarterbacks of the team, to make sure everybody's going where they need to go. And sometimes that can be a challenge with administrative staff, and then you've got your own issues with program staff where they don't know what somebody's doing down the hallway or in a different division. So we've started meeting, and we meet about every month and a half to just basically discuss some of the things that we're doing around the agency, what things people are getting involved in, to just get those communication lines open. And every company has a mission, a vision, a statement, all these wonderful, great things. But if it doesn't resonate with your staff and it doesn't fit their vision and mission for why they do what they do, so we are trying to be more aware of what that program staff team is doing. So that way, they're going to help us shape how we can change our community and influence change for positive health outcomes. And in order to do that, we all need to be talking instead of just being so siloed.
It's just amazing. It really is. And I can't help but just keep seeing that being a part of the broader world from a business perspective has to have, it informs obviously how you have a part of how you look at things. And like that focus on culture is something you see a lot of businesses have migrated to. And government is, I think, trying to go trajectory wise that way, but is not nearly as far along. And you've actually folded a lot of things in there from a communications and culture perspective. So you went to a great university, you studied business, and you're running a business. And running a business is hard. Running a family business, I have a little bit of experience with that. It's a PhD, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So, was there culture shock for you? Like, you go from being purely a business person to now ultimately running an agency. What did you find the most shocking when you rolled up in there that you were like, I can't believe this is the state of affairs?
No, there are two things that stood out the most. Um, One, the speed at which things don't get done sometimes, and two, the lack of technology that is out there to do the jobs that need to be done. They're
Yeah.
just those are two glaring issues that immediately presented to me. And, I'm an Excel guy. When I was in college, I took an Excel course where I was writing nested ifs out by hand in workbooks because we weren't allowed to do it in the computer until we knew how to do it by hand.
Ouch.
And
So
yeah,
you knew your Excel. That is
it was
brutal.
brutal. And so, but I love Excel. So I would come in and I would, as the intern, I'm writing scripts for some of these Excel formulas. So my spreadsheets will do certain things automatically. So I don't have to think about it. And the machine just does what it's supposed to. And my teammates around me are like, hey, if I want my spreadsheet to do this, could you do that for me? Yeah, no problem. And it was amazing just how little we even use software that's been around forever. Excel, probably most of us use Excel for 5% of what it is capable of.
So true,
And there's
actually. Yep.
there's 95% of it that nobody ever touches. And it's the same with all of the software we have ever seen. Some of it, goes back to hell, some of it's still tied to DOS and
Yep.
and and that's fine and dandy, but we need to move that forward, and it's hard to do all of that data moving. And so that's been one of the big things that I've been trying to slowly help change. And it's one of those things you just can't do it overnight because it's too great of a task to do that. So we just slowly take chunks away at a time that you can with that. And then as for trying to get the speed of things done, you talk to your state representatives at the Ohio Department of Health, the Ohio Department of Agriculture, the Ohio EPA, and you say, hey, these are the problems that I am facing. How can you help me achieve better, quicker, faster results? And if nobody questions those folks and nobody challenges them to step up to try to do more, um, then business stays the same. And that's where the frustrations for me would come in, is just it would just take so long to get things done. And that's truly still, even to this day, is still one of the harder things for me because it's written into code. You've got to make a public notice, you got to do this, you got to put it in the newspaper, and you got to do all these old antiquated things that they need updated. And I think the world around us is seeing that, hey, we need to make some changes in the way that we operate in the government structure, which is fine, but we need to do it in a systematic, planned out way. You can't just react without any context to what's happening.
It's so true. And you mentioned working with the state. What's interesting to me is in some cases how, and it's not universally true, but in a lot of states, how little, in some cases, collaboration there is between a local health department and the state health department. And is that just people are busy? Again, fear of causing friction. Some people are not like confrontational and they take it to the extreme where even asking a really fair question, if it's uncomfortable at all, they stay away. I know you don't have any such issue. If the question's fair, you're going to ask it. Having been through different, trying to communicate and bring in state partners and things, do you recommend that your peers, not just in Ohio, but around the nation, get more proactive in that communication and outreach with whether it's their state or whoever the agency beside them or up above them is that is going to help or hurt them and what they need to do?
Yeah, 100%. You have to rely on each other, because uh, it's the devil, sometimes. But at the same time, I know some amazing, wonderful people that will do anything to help you at that level as well. So it kind of comes with both things. It's sometimes they have to operate in a more political response way. It's instead of telling you how to do something, it's, well, the code says this. Well,
The code
that does me
crutch.
no good. Yeah, that does me no good because I know what the code says and I can interpret that however I want. And that's that professional freedom that we all have as registered environmental health specialists, which that's great. The problem is if there's a certain way that you want me to do it, and then you're going to come and audit me on how I'm doing things, and you're going to tell me, hey, you're doing this all wrong. Meanwhile, if I'm calling you for advice on how to do it and you're not telling me, but then you're going to ding me for it, now I've got a problem. And that's where I'm going to raise a flag and become a thorn in the side. And I'm going to get somebody assigned to have to answer the phone when Van calls every time.
And they're like,
and
"Oh no, it's Van again."
yeah, yeah. Well, hey, so and so, this one's you again, and that's okay, And I think most of the folks know that, when I'm that way, when I can be, my first name is Thomas, and my middle name is Van, and so when my staff hears me on the phone, sometimes I'll hang up and they'll go, "Wow, Thomas is here today," and then
So you have
when
an
I
alter ego. That's how
I
serious it is.
100% do. When I am Tom or Thomas, it Van's on a rampage, and when I'm happy go lucky, it's Van. So
Oh, that's funny. Let's
yeah.
double click then on the technology one. So, and one of the things, to the eternal credit of my day job, HS Cloud Suite, when the concept of the podcast came up, I said I'd love to take on something else, especially this, because I think that there's not been enough or a platform where people can just tell their stories, talk, communicate,
Mhm.
learn, share ideas, and grow. But I told him, I said, guys, like, want to do it, but really one condition: it can't just be a long form commercial for HS Cloud Suite. And again, to their credit, like, we don't want it to be that, but it does say here, right here on the mic flag, powered by HS GovTech, and it should be noted that you actually, one of the big things that you've done to your, that second item that you were most shocked at, technology, is you've been implementing a data management system, HS Cloud Suite. Once you took over, you really got it underway. Big picture, did once you got into it, did you start to say, "Wow, maybe now I understand why people were hesitant to bite this challenge off"? Because no matter how strong the product, et cetera, you have a day job. Your department, your staff has day jobs, and some of them may or may not be super tech savvy. What were what was your overall experience, just generally, with trying to migrate to something modern and new? Maybe what was surprisingly difficult, what was one of the most rewarding pieces of it, and then we can come back to it after those two pieces and talk a little bit about what advice you would give to an agency that is at the point you were at 3 years ago, which is standing at the starting line, knowing you've got a big lift ahead of you and knowing you need to get started.
Right. And my experience, I don't know how it's been for other folks out there, but they can, again, feel free to reach out to me about it. I went to the Ohio Environmental Health Association's annual education conference in April, about 3 years ago now. And at that conference, the state was talking about some of their new software that they were rolling out, and questions were getting thrown around, and you could sense that the software was not progressing in the way that it needed to in that moment. And at that time, I was like, I remember we've got a contract for some software. We've never done anything with it because the team that we were on, it kind of fell apart, but we're struggling. We need new software. I need all of my programs in one package instead of working out of two or three packages. It was not conducive to doing business. And so I got back to the office that following week after the conference and started digging through and going, okay, I know that contract has to be here. I know I've only been in this role for about 3.5 months now, but I got to find this thing and see when the expiration date is and if I've got any time to start playing around to learn it.
Which is where I think I met you, actually.
Yep,
I
correct.
remember
Yep.
you're like, "Hey, I've got a contract. I just inherited this. What are we doing?"
Yeah, I'm like, hey,
um,
this thing says it's still good for a little while. How do I start playing with it?
well,
And that's basically what it amounted to, And I think, as a kid, we've had Commodore 64s, we've had this, we've had that. That's one thing I've always been around as a computer, so I've never been afraid to break it. When I was in high school, it's embarrassing to admit how much doggone money I spent building computers with buddies. How I'd spend $1,900 building computers that I would only keep for a while and then sell it and then build another one. It was foolish, a waste of money
but
as a
fun, right? Like, super
but
fun.
that's it. It was, you're taking the things apart, putting the guts in, putting
Yep.
the chips in it. It was just so neat to be able to do that. And one of my middle school teachers actually, he was the computer guy. He and another couple guys had a computer business, and they built computers. And my one buddy and I, we'd go hang out with Mr. Lascaris, and we would learn how to build computers. And so that's what we did. And so we were always around it. But I never really learned too much of the coding, and some of the ones and zeros I never got that big into. But with Excel and some of those other programs, I'm like, this is kind of neat. I can do some extra level things with it. And so when it came to try to figure out how to apply that to, you know, what we're trying to do with, trying to get everything into one system and looking at the software package. And once I saw it and once I understood how things move and how things work and how we can build stuff, I'm like, you know what, it's got some plug and play feature capabilities. It's got some other, things that, even still to this day, I want to learn a little bit more about how to do in the system, but I'm not afraid to break it. And I can
Yeah.
completely see where a lot of folks would be incredibly intimidated by getting into a software package and feeling like I could break this, I could ruin
Yeah.
it, and I'm going to lose all my data. And how do I retrieve
So
it?
it's remarkable that you say that because you really put your finger on. So first at Digital Health and now at HS GovTech, been implementing and helping agencies think about how to implement it for 25 years and getting old. But I cannot think of anything I would rank higher than what you just said: fear and apprehension. I was given a keynote last summer at AFDO conference or I was on a panel, sorry, with some really great folks about reporting and analytics. And it's so interesting what you just said, because when the moderator asked the question, what's the one thing you would tell people? I said, be bold and don't be afraid. Obviously, it's not ideal if you delete the data, but we're in a world now where properly architected systems have incremental backups out the wazoo. And so not only is no one going to die, it actually doesn't even present that big of an inconvenience to anybody. And that apprehension, though, of not wanting to either, I don't know, look stupid or, like you said, break it. And maybe there's a fear of costing the department money. I actually think it's not much more complicated than that is one of the top line reasons. I think it's so
Yeah,
true.
I agree completely. I think, that yeah, funding the cost is a big player for a lot of health districts, especially the small rural ones that we, have in Ohio here. But at the same time, if your software is good and it is costly, but if it's that good, that can actually, maybe you save the cost of one employee because your software can do more.
Yep,
And
100%.
and that's where I think health districts sometimes kind of lose sight of that. They don't realize that, yeah, the software might come with a cost, but so doesn't personnel. And software is not going to cost me fringe benefits and everything else. If
Yep.
I'm paying somebody $100,000, that's really $150,000 a year that I'm paying somebody, maybe 160 by the time you
Yeah.
figure all the fringe and all this other stuff.
Yeah, fully
Well,
loaded with retirement. Yeah, the
that,
salary is deceptively not
that's
all of
it.
it.
Yeah, and people don't think about that part,
They don't.
So if I can just take, if I'm dumping $50,000 into a software package, that's saving me a lot of money long term because I'm not paying all the fringe and doing all those other things.
Hmm.
But now I've got a data system that can really do what I need to. My big thing is, and I still want to keep even building upon what we're doing is, as you just mentioned it, the reporting. How many health districts across this country, we have data. We have tons of data. We do our reports. We do this. We do that. But when it comes time to analyze that data, it's hard, especially if there's people still doing things on paper and all this other stuff. And so the data doesn't really get analyzed in the way that it could or should because it's not in a format that is easily manipulated by software to spit out reports that can be beneficial, and that's we kind of touched on it a little bit, in previous conversations with talking about how AI can even help with some of that reporting. It's going to be amazing some of the stuff that's out there, whether it's epidemiological stuff that AI is helping with, environmental health stuff. I mean, all different kinds of facets of public health are going to be impacted, but we got to have a data system that can warehouse that data in order for it to go somewhere to be used. If it's sitting on a piece of paper in a filing cabinet, nothing is going to come from it.
Yeah, so true. Like the best tech in the world can't get into your filing cabinet.
Hmm.
And yeah, and yes, AI is going to, I think, make that a lot more accessible. And what I'm really excited about for AI is its ability. We're working on some things that are really exciting because the ability. So you only know in your database the snapshot of your facility, or your agency's data and your facilities you regulate. I think one of the real things that AI will do in the coming couple of years, if not sooner, is allow agencies to start deriving um, better conclusions, especially in epidemiological foodborne illness outbreaks. We've talked about it actually in an episode recently of this show where you may have somebody in Ohio working a batch of cases that they are aware is an outbreak, but completely unaware that maybe in Virginia or West Virginia or even further, a couple states over, maybe it's a manufactured food product that's the problem, but you don't have any situational awareness that you're also getting the duplicate types of cases a couple of states away and don't realize that you're actually working one part of a huge case with other
Hmm.
counterparts in other states. Do you agree that AI holds a lot of promise for that and like broadening that situational awareness for leaders at the local agency level?
But 100%, it's weird, like, by the time, sometimes we get the recall information from, the Ohio Department of Health or whoever, there's times where it's like, hell, that was already in the news a day or two ago. And, so why is there this slowdown in getting that information out? And that's where AI is going to be able to speed that up for all of us. And that's not only just getting it to the right agencies, to the right people, but to the public, to those that need to be, aware of, hey, if you have anything from this lot, you should probably discard it or whatever the case may be. It's just going to be able to get that information out there so much quicker and in an efficient manner, and hopefully in a manner that is linkable in a way, so that way, they are catching it when it does happen.
Yeah, it's going to be really, really exciting. One of the things I think you did, and you had your project manager when you implemented Zach Ringline, as really enjoyed working with your department, and you did some things that were very noticeable and unique. And I'm curious, I think you did them intentionally. Um, you really seem to be good at, I think it's business experience speaking here as well, to not let the perfect become the enemy of the good. There's a lot of agencies that implement software, and sometimes it takes a bit longer than they stated they were going to do it. And sometimes it's an effect of that they were almost apprehensive to hit the button and go live. Almost as if, well, if I have to think of everything before I start using it. And actually, and I'm interested if you have found this to be true in your own department's case, I have found generally that sometimes some of the best ideas for how to configure or do a custom process in the system actually come after you've given your staff some time to actually use it, acclimate to it, so that
Hmm.
they're not talking about these things theoretically off the top of their head, but they're speaking about it from objective experience where they're like, wouldn't it be cool if, and they have a real world example. Do you think that you were intentionally doing that? And what else did you do that you think did lead to you getting a product into the hands of your team faster than your predecessor or other people have around the country? What was the secret sauce, and was it partially what I just mentioned?
Part of it was what you mentioned, and some of it was just the fact that I know it's never going to be perfect. We no matter what tool we all use, there's always somebody out there trying to tweak it, whether it's software or a this or a that. I've got a cousin that's um, he basically does a lot of like Shark Tank type work for Lowe's, working with hand tools. And how many different hammers can you have, right? A hammer is a hammer is a hammer, you would think, but there's constantly somebody's developing something a little different, a little newer, a little
Yeah.
of this, a little of that. And software is the same way. And so I kind of had that mindset going into this, like, we're not going to have perfection, but we can achieve, good, we can make it better, we can achieve great, but it's not all going to be great or better or amazing all at once. You have to go through those growing pains. And I know working with Zach, it's been awesome, but I know there's times where he's like, what on earth is he doing? Or early on, there would be times where I'm like, I just wasn't in it enough using it. He's too busy trying to build it, make staff happy, and take their input and try to make it happen before I even had staff in there working with it and playing with it. And that's been my big thing that I've been telling other agencies around us that I know are building this software. And they're like, how did this work out for you? And I'm like, well, when we made the decision to go live with, these, I think it was 7 of 9 programs or whatever it was of April of last year. My staff, some of them were not very happy with me because it was still not 100% what we wanted to get to. We're still constantly making little tweaks here and there along the way, which that part of it, that's, to me, that's awesome. And the more agencies have this freedom to build and do their own thing with their own software, somebody in another agency, whether it's here in Ohio or California, Texas, Wyoming, Montana, I don't care what state they're in, they might have an idea that's just going to blow my socks off. And we're going to see that at some point in time. And now you've got the government world operating in a way that's very similar to the private world, where you see what your competitors are doing and you steal it and you make it better. And we don't do that in government very well. And if we could do that, just think of how great the software will be that we'll be able to make. The problem is when we have state agencies or other folks trying to make a perfect software, that software, by the time it rolls out in 5 years of development, it's already out of date.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's what I was trying to avoid. Is I can't make this perfect, because whatever we make, 2 years ago is going to be different than what we have today. And it is, because we're constantly tweaking and adding to it, because we're finding out that, hey, we can do this, we can do that, we could collect this little bit of information,
That
we
is
can do some
so
things.
that is so right. And it's not just in especially in environmental health, the heavy regulatory ones. It's not certainly technology moving so fast, challenge one, but you also don't have a static frame at the agency level, right? Like food codes get updated, pool codes get it's a constant perpetual evolution. So you also need to account for your regulatory framework changing in addition to accounting for technology evolution. It's actually not simple, but both are important, aren't they?
Yeah, very much so. And it's hard to stay on top of both of them, truthfully, because as one thing's changing, the other one is behind the scenes, and you're not going to see those changes until they come out. And especially the regulatory stuff, you might have a handful of changes in a 5-year period. You might have the whole damn code might be rechanged, and you've got whole code sections that have gone missing that now need to be accounted for in your software that has to get caught up. So there's a lot of moving parts to it. So it's never going to be perfect inherently, just because of those things right
Yeah.
there.
What do you think the barriers are? Because you had mentioned, and I think it's really true, that there seems to almost be a bit of an allergy to borrowing boldly from ideas that have worked in other places. There's almost a knee jerk reaction at times to say, well, that's the LA way. So, man, I wish we'd have thought of that. What is the
Right.
hesitation to embrace ideas that maybe didn't originate within your own borders?
It's a good question. That's one thing that I've not figured out in this industry yet. I've not cracked that code. It's very strange to me. Um, in the wine industry, you've got wine trails in every state you go to. It's not just unique to one state that started it, right?
Yeah.
It's you do this all over the place. And public health and government, we should freely be willing to try those things and do things that other agencies are doing. I think the big hesitation for that is, you mentioned like LA or whatever. LA County, there's more people in LA County than, hell, most of Ohio, right? It's what, probably 12, 15 million people or something like that. And so I think a lot of folks, they hear a big county and they think, oh, it's going to be such a resource heavy program. It's going to cost so much. It's going to do all these things. Well, can't you just do it in a scale that fits your community? And I don't think they
Yes.
sometimes take that step back and go, okay, how can we scale that to match what we're doing in Marion, Ohio?
That is so right.
And
That
and
is right.
sometimes I think that just gets lost on people because they see it on this big scale and they see all this money and all these other things,
Yeah.
and they forget that, just scale it down. I'm a small winery. I make a couple thousand gallons of wine a year, but the process that I go through is the same thing that Mondavi and Gallo and the largest wineries in this country do. It's the same process that's been happening for thousands of years.
Just a
It's
question of
just
scale, right?
That's it. It's just scale. And that's the same thing that applies to what we're doing here in government. And again, I think that just gets lost because people are so used to just, this is the way we've always done it. Sometimes they forget that creativity isn't owned by large communities. We can be as creative as the next. You just got to ask and try and do. And if it doesn't work, then guess what? You don't do it again. You move on and you try next. And
Yeah.
that's how you grow. And there's a lot of hesitation for that, which is funny because there's some amazingly intelligent people that are in this industry that they kind of get in their own way sometimes with their own intelligence. It's like, you just need to just rip that bandage off and go. And that's kind of what my approach was with with moving into using the software early on instead of waiting to perfect it. It was, we're just going to do it. And my team wasn't happy. And I tell people around me, your teams aren't going to be happy, but don't wait. Because if you tell your team, oh, let's dabble in it, use it when you can to test it, they're never going to test it because they're going to use what is in front of them that they're used to doing. They don't want to waste their time playing around in a system that they're not going to use. They would rather put their time into doing the reports in the system where it counts.
That is so true. If you just dip your toe in the water, they're like, it's not worth the effort. That is, for everybody
100%.
listening, they probably resonates with them. If it doesn't, pay attention to what he just said because it's so true. 100%. You had mentioned going to Ohio Environmental Health Association like 3 years ago, and this one will actually be coming out right before the Ohio Environmental Health Association, which
Oh,
is
nice.
next week when we're sitting here recording it. So quick plug time. I feel like I'm a comedian with my show dates coming up, but so you can catch us if you're watching this and you're in the Montana, Wyoming area. We'll be at the Montana Environmental Health Association conference, April 8th through 10th. We're giving a keynote there, and there'll also be a preview of the system that the state of Montana is implementing from HS Cloud Suite during that. And then I'm taking the red eye to Columbus, and I'll actually get to see you. Nothing keeps somebody more honest from asking crazy questions than knowing I have to see you face to face in a week. But on the 11th, we'll be at the Ohio Environmental Health Association. And interestingly enough, the topic we'll be presenting on there is how to navigate a messy, challenging data management platform environment from a state to local perspective. So, some obviously for anybody in Ohio, I think probably understands why that topic was asked for. But really looking forward to actually seeing you in person and a lot of your colleagues from Ohio there in Columbus. So end of the plug there, but wanted to make sure we got that in there. So everybody who's been for even a minute in EH can usually has a ton of things to talk about on this topic. What have been some of the crazier, funny, we don't have to be sad, but crazier, just like wow, scenarios that you've had to adjudicate or your staff has encountered that you've had to adjudicate in your time in public health?
Yeah, that's the one thing, I wish there was a comic strip or a sitcom or something. They have the sitcom about animal control. I think public health would really be a hilarious show because we're working with the general public. And when you work with the general public, you're going to see everything from A to Z. You're going to see the best of humanity, you're going to see the worst of humanity, and everything in between. I remember one of my first early days doing solid waste and housing complaints, and going to a house that the person opens the door and they're like, well, we're having flooding issues. They were complaining about a landlord with not maintaining the plumbing. And I'm like, okay, well, what unit is in? And she was like, well, it's in the downstairs unit. But I'm not going down there because it's so bad. And I'm like, oh, so the unit I'm not, so I'm like, so the unit I'm knocking on the door for is not the unit I need to visit. And she was like, no. And I'm like, okay.
And you're
So then
supposed to
she
go
got
in there, but she's not going to touch it.
correct. And so my spidey senses started tingling a little bit, and I'm like, I don't know if I am dressed or prepared for what is about to happen. And so it was a downstairs unit, and she goes and gets the other tenant with her. And of course, it's a person I knew from our community. And they were like, well, that's the unit down these stairs. It was in this basement. And they opened the door, and I'm like, is that water on the first step covering that? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, okay, I think I'll be back. And so I went and I got my muck boots, and I actually at that time I called the fire inspector who he's come to some housing complaints with me for some other things, and I had a feeling with the landlord that we had at that property, we were probably going to find some things for the fire guy there as well. And the anyhow, so he brings his boots, and we go down the stairs, and the tenant gives us permission to go ahead and open the door and go in so we can see what the cause of the problem is. And we open the door, we're at the door at the bottom of the stairs, and we opened the door, and maybe 6 inches of water, so it wasn't bad. But then when we opened the door was kind of the dam holding everything back.
Oh
And
no.
unfortunately, it was not quite a dam rupture of sewage, but it was pretty doggone close. And it was pretty
Actual raw sewage.
actually raw sewage. It
Mm.
was, so we're climbing through this stuff. It's maybe about a foot and a half deep,
Oh.
and
Did
out of
did
the
it
laundry
smell
room.
terrible?
It was absolutely awful. It was awful. And out of the laundry room, it was coming out of for the dryer, the drain for the dryer. It was just the plumbing was just backing up. And it
Oh.
was and we were watching it just pouring out. We're like, oh my Lord. So we finished doing our cursory look, and he's checking some of the things that he is, and I'm checking mine. And of course, we've got an issue that's going to need to be addressed. And I had been on a kick with tires in our community. Um, Early on in my time doing solid waste, I really took to trying to remove all these open dump tires. There's got to be a way to do it. So we started really targeting them. And I saw this paneling on this wall in this basement apartment, and it was peeling away. And so I had my flashlight, and I'm shining it through. And on the other side of this basement unit, there was almost 600 tires just packed into this basement. And so you never know when a housing complaint is going to turn into a solid waste complaint, turn into who knows what. So those kinds of stories just seem to happen all the time.
You
And then,
got a
everybody's
twofer.
heard. Go ahead.
You got a twofer in that one. Solid waste
100%.
plus human waste.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Yeah, both are wastes that you don't want to be around much, but it's part of the job, to try to help those folks make sure that, the landlords are living up to their end of the bargain and making sure that, all the plumbing is delivering what it should where it should. And
yeah.
unfortunately, in this case, it was not. We've all had bad experiences with food facilities and those kinds of things, but that one has always stood out in my mind just because it was like you said, it was the twofer that kind of contributed to both of those things. So usually my crazy stories stem from solid waste or housing, but probably one of the most tragic was we had a woman that was weed whacking her yard with a little electric weed whacker. And it was probably a 4 or 5 foot tall grass at this property. And so I went to give her notice for the grass and weeds being, above city code and that kind of stuff. And she was so livid with me, the weed whacker shaking and pointing at me. And, I'm like, what the heck? This little lady's going to hurt me. And this is where it gets really tragic, and it's awful, but this just shows how you don't know the state of people that you're working with. 2 days later, she ended up killing a neighbor for money.
Oh,
And
whoa.
it's just that's the kind of stuff that you just don't expect to happen in your community. You're just
Mm.
there trying to talk to this lady about, hey, hey, I see you're struggling. I see you're trying to weed whack the grass to get it down, but this little electric weed whacker with
Yeah.
a 4 inch little string on it
Won't
is
work.
it's not going to do anything. and she was already in a heightened level of awareness. I'm sure there were drugs and some other things going on in her life at
Wow.
that time. But, come to find out 2 days later, you see on Facebook all this news going
Wow.
around, like, oh my goodness, that's the woman that I was just dealing
That
with not that long ago.
That
So
is tragic. Also underscores the point that it is not without risk in a lot of situations to the
correct.
to the health and safety of the environmental health professionals out there in the
Correct.
field.
And that's another thing where, some of this AI that's going to come into play over time. Just think about how sensors are going to play into the software that we use. And those sensors, even if it's a heart rate monitor or, a carbon monoxide sensor that we're carrying on us, all these things that can spit back and talk back to the software. And it's not just, us in public health, but other industries where, safety risk could be, high for those of us that are knocking on doors and dealing with the public that might be in a heightened state of stress and trauma because of things in their life.
Hmm.
And, there's tools that are going to be out there that are going to, hopefully help protect us and protect that individual.
They are. And so I hope, like, we could literally go another hour plus. I hope that you'll come back and join us again for a part two, because
Yeah,
this is
definitely.
fascinating. Congratulations, first of all, on the winery and of course, your rapid climb in EH. It really is a great story, great success story. And we will put the link to your winery. We'll put, if you're okay with it, your email address.
I,
If people want to reach out and follow up on some of the things that you've talked about, we'll put all that in the description of the episode on all the streaming platforms. And look forward to seeing you in 1 week now in Columbus, there in Ohio.
yep, sounds great.
All righty. I really appreciate it, Van. And thanks everybody for tuning in. If you want to reach out to us, you have questions, comments, ideas, or something you think that we're missing that we should be talking about, feel free to drop an email to beyond@hscloudsuite.com, beyond@hscloudsuite.com. Until next time, I'm Cameron Garrison for the Beyond Data Management Podcast. Thanks so much for spending an hour with us. We'll talk to you soon.